The Italian Wine Podcast is the community-driven platform for Italian wine geeks around the world. Support the show by donating at ItalianWinepodcast.com. Donate €5 or more and we'll send you a copy of our latest book, My Italian Grape Geek Journal, absolutely free. To get your free copy of My Italian Grape Geek Journal, click Support Us at ItalianWinepodcast.com or wherever you get your pods. Grazie mille. Welcome to the Italian Grape Geek podcast. Join us as we explore personal stories of travel and tasting with Italy's must-know grape varietals. Chart your own course with My Italian Grape Geek Journal, your personal tasting companion to accompany the series. Available now on Amazon. With thanks to Colangelo and Partners for their generous support with this project.
Hi, I'm Kevin Di Lucente. In addition to being an Italian wine ambassador with Vinitaly International Academy, I'm also a certified specialist of wine with the Society of Wine Educators and an Italian wine professional with Italian Wine Central. Now, I could go on more about me, but you're not here for me, are you? You're here for the grapes. And quite frankly, we don't have time with today's topics. So today I won't be talking about just one grape. I'll be talking about two groups of grapes. And when we talk about groups, we're talking about grapes that share a similar name, but are not necessarily usually at all related, like the families of grapes that you find. In our case, we're going to chat about the Trebbiano Group first, and then later the Vernaccia Group, which represent 15 different grapes in the case of the Trebbiano. There are a couple that share some sort of relation. It's likely based on what we can tell that Trebbiano is also of Mediterranean origin. So Trebbiano, like many grape names, has multiple theories. And I love the way that Italian wine grapes are named based on historical attributes, what the grapes presented in the vineyards, their history, and the way they moved around the country. Among the theories for Trebbiano are that the name originates from the Trebbia River in Emilia-Romagna. It could also be a reference from a wine Pliny the Elder mentions in one of his texts. However, what seems to be the most popular theory is that the name originates from a Franconian term meaning vigorous shoot, which I will certainly not try to pronounce here. So what I'm about to say is a broad generalization, and the subject is certainly more nuanced, but all the Trebbianos seem to share some similar traits. They usually have a high vigor, a high yield, long and large bunches, and they ripen later and are adaptable to different terroirs. So you can imagine that for many reasons, these traits were very desirable, and wines made from Trebbiano were even considered luxury items in the 13th and 14th centuries. Okay, so here's a list of some of the Trebbianos. Trebbiano Abruzzese, Trebbiano Toscano, Trebbiano Romagnolo, Trebbiano Spoletino, Trebbiano di Lugana, Trebbiano di Soave, Trebbianina, Trebbiano Giallo, Trebbiano Modenese, Trebbiano di Spagna. Of course, there's more. And of course, many of these also have synonymous names. For example, Trebbiano di Lugana is also known as Trebbiana. Let's dissect these grapes a little bit further, starting with Trebbiano Abruzzese. That is the name of the grape, but the wine made from it is Trebbiano d'Abruzzo DOC. It's also interesting to note that 100% varietal wines are rare. Historically, it was often confused with Trebbiano Toscano, Bombino Bianco, and Passerina in the vineyards. And therefore, due to that confusion, the wine ends up being a blend, even if unknowingly so. So Bombino Bianco was actually long thought to be a synonym of Trebbiano Abruzzese. But as we know now, is a distinct cultivar, and it's actually even possible to make a Trebbiano Abruzzese DOC wine with up to 85% Bombino Bianco in the blend. As these grapes have different needs in the vineyard, you can imagine that treating them all the same and making a wine for them can drastically vary the final quality or outcome. Not to say that a wine made with blended grapes is going to be bad or lower in quality per se, but just interesting to note. So a little bit more about the grape. Unlike other Trebbiano grapes, they usually remain deep straw green even when ripe, the color of the grapes. Acid can drop fast. It's important when the harvest happens to preserve this freshness. Vine training in pergola is sometimes employed to protect the grapes from the sun. And careful attention is given to the altitude of the vineyards. It likes rolling hills close to the sea, but not sun or heat. There are actually altitude limits as part of the DOC, depending on exposition. Texturally, the wines can be a bit more like an unoaked Chablis. They're dense on the palate with bright acidity and usually savory and can have a flinty mineral quality. Fruit flavors of lemon, apple, peach, white flowers like acacia and orange blossom, as well as honey and almond are all potentially present in the wines. The grapes can easily oxidize due to high polyphenols, and a reductive winemaking is sometimes employed to counteract this. though some argue this creates a wine more like a Sauvignon Blanc, which is less true to the variety. As someone who tries a lot of Italian wines, I can't even be certain I've had one that is 100% varietal, although I'm sure many of my contemporaries can affirm to have done so. Producers to check out are Valentini, Tiberio, Mascherelli, Illuminati, and Valle Reale. So these wines in the market that I work in Western New York. New York is a great wine market in the United States. Certainly the city of New York, which is about 6.5 hours away from where I'm at right now by car, sees a lot more interesting varietals. And I would say that you do see the Trebbiano d'Abruzzo wines here and there on the shelves, but certainly there's not a huge amount of them. You will certainly see some of these. For example, Mascherelli is found quite commonly in my market. So Trebbiano Abruzzese shares genetics with the Umbrian Trebbiano Spoletino, which we'll chat about briefly as well. But first, let's move on to Trebbiano Toscano, because that's the big one, I think. This was, until quite recently, the most widely planted white grape in Italy. However, current data supports that Glera and Pinot Grigio have recently leapfrogged Trebbiano Toscano due to their respective popularities. Obviously, Prosecco is huge. Pinot Grigio is huge. Trebbiano Toscano is related to the grape of Soave fame, Garganega, and is also known in France as Unier Blanc, where it's used as part of the blend to make Cognac and Armagnac along with Folie Blanche and Colombard. In Umbria, it's called Procanico and is used as a blending component in the wines of Orvieto. It's also used to make balsamic vinegar. It was first mentioned in documents from Siena, and in addition to being grown all over Italy and in parts of France, is grown in many other parts of the world, including the US and Australia, which is a testament to its adaptability. It was used in a crossing with another hybrid grape, which created another hybrid grape called Vidal Blanc, used to make world-class ice wine in Canada. I actually live quite close to Ontario, where they make some of the best ice wine in the world. Back to Italy, you'll find it allowed for use in many DOC wines in Tuscany, in the Veneto, Lombardy. There's Lugana, which goes in the Veneto and in Lombardy. Trebbiano Toscano is late budding, loves the warmth, highly adaptive, high in acid, which lends backbone to blends such as Vinsanto. It has aromas and flavors of lemon and chamomile, although with age it doesn't necessarily further complexity on the aroma spectrum. I've quite recently had the Tenuta di Capezzana Trebbiano Toscano, which hails from the Tuscan appellation of Carmignano. It's a wine they started making only a couple years ago, and was aged for a bit in barrel with lees contact and batonnage to add complexity. So not necessarily probably a common way to handle the grape. However, my favorite association with Trebbiano Toscano is with Vinsanto. I'm going to get a little personal here. So in 2005, a true angel, my sweet cat Daffodil, came into our lives and brought us immense joy for 18 years until she left the world. To commemorate her life, my wife and I opened a bottle of 2005 Avignonesi Vinsanto di Montepulciano. And as is the tradition in Tuscany, we dipped these little cookies known as cantucci into the pleasantly sweet wine, which had notes of dried fig, nuts, and a core of acidity provided by the Trebbiano, which I think is a fitting tribute to a cat I would regularly call my little sweet cookie. Quickly, I'd like to give mention to Trebbiano Spoletino, which I mentioned earlier as being related to Trebbiano Abruzzese, grown in the townships of Spoleto and Montefalco in Umbria, also found in Orvieto. It also shares a genetic tie to Grechetto di Orvieto, which is another grape used in the Orvieto blend. Something to pay attention to, though, is if the wine's made taste like a Moscato Bianco, for example, it's likely they're blending other local aromatic grapes in the wine. It's not 100% varietal, but as we know is the case with most of the Trebbiano wines, they're quite often blends. You should seek out producers such as Fangoli, Tabarini, Antonelli, and San Marco. You can find Vinsantos in my market. You can find lots of Trebbiano wines, Colle Ugani wines. I think you can blend a little bit of Trebbiano into those. I would say that because they're not necessarily 100% varietal, it's sometimes difficult to pinpoint these wines in our market. Another couple Trebbiano grapes before we move on to the next group are some of my favorite, and that are Trebbiano di Soave and Trebbiano di Lugana. Although these wines are technically linked to Verdicchio, the one from Soave being identical and the one from Lugana being very closely related. And as I mentioned, it's usually referred to as Turbiana. Interestingly, Verdicchio likely originates from this area of Italy, Verona, and only later found its way to Le Marche due to the migration of farmers from Verona after a bout of the plague in Le Marche. I love historical little tidbits about that. You can actually trace anthropological migration, and it includes the grapes, obviously, because people were taking them with them. So I love the wines made from these grapes, and I regularly drink the Trebbiano di Soave called Massifiti from Suavia and the Lugana from Zenato, and they make a couple different Luganas. These areas tend to be warmer than Le Marche, so the wine's a little bit more full-bodied and waxy in comparison. The wines are textural, and they often include floral aromas, almonds, hallmark wintergreen or mint note, and a saline quality. Lastly, we can mention Trebbiano Romagnolo, which is found mostly in Emilia-Romagna, often co-planted with Trebbiano Toscano, and unsurprisingly productive, as is the case with its Trebbiano Group friends. Wines made from it can be more dense with a riper fruit profile and are a step up in quality from the old vine Trebbiano Toscano. Wines of Trebbiano Romagnolo can be made sparkling, as is also the case with the wines of Lugana. So Zenato makes a sparkling Lugana. Food pairings, just to cap off the Trebbiano Group real quick, they can range from the aforementioned Cantucci with Vinsanto to lake fish and creamy risotto with Lugana, and pecorino and cheese, seafood pasta, and pesto with Trebbiano d'Abruzzo. But obviously, as variable as all the wines can be, you can also have many, many more pairings.
Are you enjoying this podcast? Don't forget to visit our YouTube channel, Mama Jumbo Shrimp, for fascinating videos covering Stevie Kim and her travels across Italy and beyond, meeting winemakers, eating local food, and taking in the scenery. Now back to the show.
Okay, so on to the Vernaccia Group. As I mentioned, the Vernaccia Group is a group and not a family of grapes, so they're not at all related. And actually, one of them is red. So Vernaccia, like many grape names, has multiple theories, as it was the case with Trebbiano. Among them are that the name possibly originates from one of the 5 towns of the Cinque Terre, Vernazza. But what is more widely believed is that the name derives from the word vernaculum, which roughly translates to local grape. And like what was the case with the popularity of the Malvasia Group, Vernaccia became somewhat of a brand name and spread due to its popularity. We can find mentions of Vernaccia in texts dating back to the 1200s in San Gimignano and in Sardinia going back to 1397. While there are several grapes that are called Vernaccia outside of what I'll mention here, we really are talking about the 3 grapes, Vernaccia di San Gimignano, Vernaccia di Oristano, and Vernaccia Nera. So let's dissect them a little bit further. Vernaccia di San Gimignano is both the name of the grape and the DOCG wine made from it. Interestingly, Vernaccia di San Gimignano was the first registered DOC wine in 1966. It was later elevated to DOCG in 1993. It is named for the hilltop medieval Tuscan town around which the grape is grown, San Gimignano, of course, famous for its towers. The grape is also found in Liguria, where it's called Piccabon. It's a white grape with high levels of tannin and a relatively low acidity and relatively neutral profile. So when I say high tannin, obviously a lot of white wine is made in a way where they're not extracting tannin because they're separating the skins from the juice immediately. So it can be tannic if you leave the skins in. In the glass, you'll find usually a pale yellow color with green tinges and notes of lemon zest, sage, and almonds. It's typically a savory wine, but can still provide some fresh, crisp qualities. Some Reserva wines even spend time in oak, adding a vanilla character as a result. Producers to seek out are Panizzi, Montenidoli. I actually have a nice olive oil from Montenidoli right now that I'm using, and Cesani. Although personally, I've drank more from a producer called San Querico. So on to Vernaccia di Oristano. Once again, Vernaccia di Oristano is both the name of the grape and the DOC wine made from it. It's found on the island of Sardinia, where it has a small number of plantings of mostly old vines, anywhere from 30 to 50 years. The wines made from it can be normal dry table wines or dry fortified wines. However, the fortified or liquoroso wines are less common. What is common is to rest the wine in barrels, not completely topped off, at about 90% capacity, which encourages the development of something called floor, similar to what happens in the production of sherry wines. Some of the wines spend a long time in these barrels and therefore become highly oxidized and have their alcohol levels boosted due to the evaporation of water. This happens slowly due to the protection of the floor, which has its own unique fermentative and oxidative metabolism. The quality of these wines can be on par with high-quality sherry wines. However, in recent years, unfortunately, this style has fallen a little bit out of favor with the general consumer, and the production is a little in jeopardy, let's say. Most Vernaccia di Oristano wines have flavors and aromas that are complex because of this process. In the glass, you'll find things like dried apricot, bitter almonds, hazelnut, orange rind, wilted flowers, really cool things. Producers to try are Contini and Silvio Carta. My only experience, though, personally, as many Italian wines as I try, is on both occasions when I was a judge during the 5-star Wines Without Walls that happens in Verona. We got to try a few of them, but unfortunately we're not granted access to which producers we're trying as we're trying them in the moment. But as I was trying them, we know what grape and what area we're trying it from. And it's very cool to be able to try these wines because I certainly don't see them ever in my market here. I imagine they're somewhere in New York City probably, but certainly in Western New York area, there may be one or two places. The company I work for does not sell one. We're one of the bigger importer distributors in the U.S. So you can imagine that even in markets where it's popular, it's somewhat difficult to find these wines, at least in the United States. So lastly, Vernaccia Nera. This is the cool one. This is a red grape. Unlike any of the other two Vernaccia grapes mentioned, which were white, of course, Professore Attilio Scienza believes this wine is basically Garnacha and therefore also related to Cannonau and Toccari Rosso. So there's a relation there. The planting of this grape is very low, though. There's less than 21 hectares. It's found in Le Marche near the Metellica zone where they make Verdicchio. Obviously, we talked about Verdicchio in the Trebbiano Group. The wines made from Vernaccia Nera are either Serra Patrona DOC for the dry wines or Vernaccia di Serra Patrona DOCG for either the dry or sweet versions. The DOCG wines are sparkling, and they actually undergo a rather confusing process where there's 3 separate fermentations. So at harvest, about 60% of the grapes are fermented as usual, while 40% hang out on straw mats to dry and later fermented. Lastly, the wine either sees a third fermentation in tank or in the bottle. So either Charmant or in the bottle, not necessarily similar to Champagne, but in that same regard, which obviously makes the wine sparkling. The resulting wines can be somewhat like a Lambrusco. And in the glass, you find slightly intense aromatics of strawberry, cranberry, clove, underbrush, moss, Kinoto. There's a bitter finish. I've not been fortunate to try wine from this area. I would love to. Other than the Verdicchio di Metellica wines that I've tried lots of, but I know it's only a matter of time before I get my hands on a bottle. And based on the small quantity of plantings, I also think this is probably even more difficult to source in my market than Vernaccia di Oristano, but not impossible. There's Italian wine geeks like us all out there, and we're all calling for these wines from time to time. Food pairings for the Vernaccia grapes, I'm sure you can imagine to be a whole wide array of possibilities, being both white and red grapes. So with Vernaccia di San Gimignano, things such as cod, white meat, shellfish come to mind. For Vernaccia di Oristano, you can utilize the wine during dinner and after dinner for dessert, serving with things like blue cheese, dark chocolate, almond biscuits called amaretti di Oristano in Sardinia. Vernaccia Nera wines supposedly pair well exceptionally, although I'm a vegetarian, but there's a spreadable pork sausage called ciauscolo. I believe I'm saying that right, which is a sausage that's cold smoked over juniper berries and hung to air dry. It sounds delicious. And that's pretty much it for the Vernaccia Group and the Trebbiano Group. Thanks for listening. And I hope you're all enjoying wonderful native Italian grapes out there.
Listen to the Italian Wine Podcast wherever you get your podcasts. We're on SoundCloud, Apple Podcasts, Spotify, Himalaya FM, and more. Don't forget to subscribe and rate the show. If you enjoy listening, please consider donating through ItalianWinePodcast.com. Any amount helps cover equipment, production, and publication costs. Until next time, Cin Cin.